In our previous video, one of my previous videos, I did mention to you that Darius, the king of Persia, had promised to punish Athens. And the reason he wanted to punish Athens is because Athens had joined Miletus in attacking Sardis and burning down Sardis. And Sardis was a city that was like the capital of Persia in the west. Like it's where the governor who ruled over the lands that Persia conquered in you'll say the Levant region and Europe, and much of what we know today as Turkey lived. The city itself was located in a part of what we know today as Turkey. So uh, Athens joining Miletus to go to Sardis and to burn down Sardis, that was something that needed to be the Athens, Darius felt like he needed to punish Athens because of that. And in fact, when Darius was informed about the attack on Sardis, he knew about Miletus, but he didn't know much about Athens. And the question he asked the people around him is, who are these Athenians? And he was given information about them. I've told you this in another video. And when he was told about who the Athenians were, he called one of his servants to bring him a bow and arrow, and he shoot the arrow to the sky, and he promised and he requested God Jupiter to help him to punish the Athenians. Basically, that's what he did. Now, there was an initial attempt to punish Athens. It happened when Miletus was attacked, and there was a campaign that it's not exactly that time, but it's a campaign that came immediately after, and it was led by a guy called Mardonius. Mardonius was a general in the Persian army, and he was given the responsibility by Darius to go and conquer Greek city-states and islands. And he made that attempt. He did conquer a few city-states and islands, but he was defeated somewhere, and he had to run back to Asia. Now, after Mardonius had failed in that mission, Darius picked two generals. The two generals were Datis and Antiphanes. Now, this Antiphanes was a son to Antiphanes that I've mentioned in many of my previous videos. Now, he picked these two generals to go, and he gave them specific instructions, and the instructions were to go to the Aegean Sea and fight the Greek city-states and conquer as many as they would. But more specifically, they were supposed to go and attack Eritrea and Athens. Those were the two city-states that Darius was mostly interested in, and he wanted these two generals to go and conquer. So he sent them, and they left Persia, and they went to that region occupied by the Greeks. It's always challenging to say where the Greeks were located, the ancient Greeks. You can't say Europe and you can't say Asia, and the reason is that there were many Greek city-states that were on the land that is part of Turkey today. And Turkey has never really been considered to be part of Europe. And then, of course, there are Greek city-states and islands in the Aegean Sea, and some of those today we can say they are in Europe, mostly in Europe because most of them now are part of Greece. And then there are those of what you can consider as the Greece mainland, which is basically Europe. So, and then there were Greeks who were even along the Levant, what has been called the Levant, which is the region occupied by Israel and Jordan, that region. So that's why it's always difficult to say whether it's Europe or Asia. Anyways, so these two generals are given a huge army by Darius, and they move to that region. Now, Athens and Eritrea were major Greek city-states, and these generals had to put together a huge army that would succeed in that expedition. So they leave Persia, they come to that region, and I would say they came to a part of what we know today as Turkey to prepare more for that encounter. And then before they went to Eritrea and Athens, these two generals and their army did first go and conquered a few other islands and city-states. Examples of that are Nexus, which I've mentioned. So I've mentioned also in my previous videos. So they did first go to those ones before they went to straight to Athens and Eritrea. Now, after they conquered most of those others, they decided to go first to Eritrea. And the funny thing that happened, or an interesting thing happened with the Eritreans. Now, Eritreans, when they knew that the Persians were coming, they did send a message to Athens asking them to come to their aid, to send an army to help them stand against the Persians. But now, when the Athenians came, Athenians did come, and when they arrived, they found out that there was the Eritreans were not they were not speaking from one. They were not speaking in unison. It seems like there are some Eritreans who wanted to be with the Persians, and others who wanted to be with to stand on their own and to fight for independence of Eritrea. Now, when the Athenians arrive, they meet some guy, and the name of this guy is Aeschines. Aeschines goes and tells the Athenians that, you know what, while you want to help us, there's a problem in the city. There are some of the Eritreans who want us to be with the Persians, or to basically surrender to the Persians, and there are some who want to fight and protect the independence of Eritrea. And when the Athenians found out that the Eritreans were not in agreement as to how they wanted to face the Persians, the Athenians withdrew and they went back home. And indeed, Eritrea attempted to defend itself, but some in the city, of course, betrayed the city, and the city was conquered by the Persians. And then most of them were taken captive, and they were taken to Asia. So that was the end of Eritrea. Now, with Eritrea gone, the Athenians were next. And now the Persians were preparing to come to Athens, and they had someone on their side who was an Athenian who was guiding them on how to go to Athens and capture it. And this is Hippias. Remember, Hippias is the guy who made the Athenians to join the Milesians to go and attack Sardis. The reason the Athenians went to attack Sardis alongside the Milesians is because they had heard that Hippias, who used to be their tyrant, who they chased away at some point, was talking to the Persians, and it seemed like he wanted to persuade the Persians to help him come back home and continue being a tyrant. So this Hippias was now on the side of Persians. Seems like Persians had embraced him, accepted him, and they wanted to use him. And they had promised him once they conquer Athens, they were going to install him as the tyrant there. So he was the one now leading the Persians to come to Athens. Now, Athenians at this point, while the Persians were coming and preparing to attack Athens, the Athenians reached out to Sparta and asked them for help. Now, the Spartans did not come, and it's not because they did not want to help the Athenians, or we might never know whether that was really the reason. But when the Athenians sent someone to Sparta to go and talk to the Spartans about them coming with their own army and joining the Athenians to help them fight the Persians, the messenger reached there, he gave them the information, and then unfortunately the people of Sparta were celebrating a special occasion. It was the 9th day of the first decade, I think there's a way they were counting time, and because of that, they could not go leave Sparta when the moon was not full moon. So they had to wait until the moon was full moon, and then they could march out of Sparta and go try to help Athens. So they didn't go. They told the Athenians, "You will have to wait." But the Persians were coming, so there is no way that it was not the Athenians to decide whether to fight or not. The Persians were coming, so but the Spartans are telling them, "No, you have to wait for some days until the full moon is here, and then now we would come and try to help you fight the Persians." So the messenger took back the message to the Athenians, and the Athenians knew that they were on their own, and they started organizing an army, and they knew they were going to fight the Persians at a place known as Marathon. And they put together an army, but there is a small city-state that joined them. These people used to be known as the Plataeans. The Plataeans came and joined them. But now, as they were planning for this war, among the Athenians, there was also some form of disagreement. It wasn't like what was with the Eritreans who were like, some of them were keen on betraying the city. With the Athenians, that was not the case. With the Athenians, the question was, all of them were open with their intentions, but some of them were like, they were not confident that they had the capacity to face the Persians. So they had 10 generals, and there was, of course, the main general. They could call him, the guy called Callimachus was like the overall general, but there were 10 generals under him. And these 10 generals were discussing whether they should face the Persians or whether they should just leave the city and run away. And 5 of the generals were of the opinion that they should face the Persians at battle. And 5 were of the opinion that the Persians were too strong for them, and maybe they should consider other alternatives like escaping the city. So they reached, when they were 5-5. Now the Callimachus, who was like the main general, they now looked to him for him to give the way forward, because his vote had more power over, or it was like a veto power over the rest. And Callimachus was initially not sure, but he was persuaded by those who were like, we need to go to war. And he finally made a decision and said, we're going to fight the Persians. So they now march towards the Marathon. This was like a field, I guess. And the Persians are on the other side, and the Athenians are on this side with the Plataeans, the other guys who had decided to join them. And the Athenians seemed to have confused the Persians for a moment, because they came into a formation that did not make sense to the Persians. They had this small army in the middle who did not have, they were a handful of men who did not have horses or archers, like guys with the arrows and bows. They just guys fighting with swords, and they were a small army in the middle. And the Persians for a moment were like, looks like the Athenians have decided to commit suicide, basically. It's like, this is not war. This is just giving up themselves to be killed. And this small group of people charged on the Persians, and that was a new way of fighting. Herodotus tells us that was a new way, and the Athenians were the ones who came up with that new way of charging on your opponent with that kind of a small army, and they did that. Meanwhile, the rest of the army was out there. It was spread out, and this small handful group of men ran to the Persians, and they started fighting, but they were defeated. And then the Persians now started moving in, thinking like now they've really, they had basically demoralized the Athenians. But what they didn't know, that this was a strategy. When they moved in, the Athenians came on them, and they killed all of them. And they defeated them, basically. And a small army of the Persians, or maybe not a small army, the rest of the Persian army decided to go into their ships and run to Athens, because the city now, where they were fighting, was not really the city, it was some distance from the city. They decided they were going to go into their ships and sail fast to the city and reach there before the Athenians arrive, so that they can take over the city before the Athenians. But the Athenians managed to rush before and reach there before them. And when the Persians reached there, the Athenians were already there to defend their city, and the Persians could not do anything, and they just boarded their ships and left. And basically, the Athenians survived, and Darius at this point did not manage to punish the Athenians for what they did.